Okay, so this release planning session is focused on Loon, which is the release that we'll be doing in August. From a logistics standpoint, please mute your lines if you're not speaking. This call is being recorded. I've started the recording. Agenda, we'll go over the goals for this planning session, the roadmap, the schedule, and we'll go through all the slides for the various contributors. So the goals. So we're doing it slightly different this time around. What I wanted to do is make sure we review the Kingfisher accomplishments, as well as the Loon and M plans. This way it'll tie it together in terms of what we're delivering and what is coming up in the next couple of releases. If there are dependencies that you have on any other brigade or person, please call out your dependencies, and then this is a good way for us to understand at the end of the release the integration load and make sure everyone's on the same page about what is being planned. Okay, so from a roadmap perspective, Loon is focused on platform hardening. So the features are essentially in priority order. Of course, you'll have to kind of take into account that there are features in incubation too. So dynamic configuration is at the top of our list with a focus on sharding of subtrees, some performance improvements, and a configuration synchronizer.
Yeah, let's not do that. Can we like deprioritize that or remove it from the sprint or from the release? Because like dynamic configuration is like one of those things that's just been a kind of morass. It hasn't really delivered anything of value, and I'm not even sure it's something we need. Can we have some more like discussion on these priorities? Because
you're gonna have to do this. It's gonna have to be done. It's something we're signed up for, and I can discuss it too with you offline happily. But I think it's not gonna be productive use of time to talk about it here, if you don't mind.
Well, this is the meeting where we talked about like what we want in the release and what should be a priority.
No, yeah, but this is something that our stakeholders are asking us to do, so we're gonna have to do this.
I can't really understand anything you're saying, Thomas, but I'm hoping that there can be some like, since this is a planning meeting, I'm hoping we can have some discussion on priorities and about sort of like a shared vision of what we really want to do.
Sure. So ISSU and dynamic and basically dynamic configuration, at least portion of the dynamic configuration which can be used to demonstrate that ONOS can effectively configure devices using Yang and netconf or restconf or GNMI. That's something that we need to have in order to compete with Open Daylight, in order to be able to also penetrate some of the bastions of service providers. So it's something we have to have in order to be able to effectively do this.
Well, I'm okay with having a netconf and a GNMI southbound, but you know, the rest of this stuff about subtrees and configuration synchronizer, like a lot of this I'm pretty skeptical of.
Well, I mean, this is how we think of this as our effectively distributed flow table. Okay, just like we have a distributed flow table in order to be able to program flows in a distributed cluster, we need to be able to have some persistency to the configuration information that is destined for devices. So think of it in those terms, and the idea here is not to produce MD South, of course, but at least to be able to preserve the configuration and to be able to provide some basis for reconciling what the devices actually have applied to them versus what is intended to be applied to them. Did that answer your question?
Not really. I guess we can talk about it more. It's just that I sort of wonder where all these things came from, and I'm kind of, this is definitely not the same kind of priority list that I would put there. But it's not clear where this came from and what the overall goals are for the release, especially if the goal is platform hardening.
Yeah. So
none of these things really apply to platform hardening, they all sort of look like kind of new features.
Well, no. So if you recall, at ONS we demonstrated kind of a rudimentary version of configuring services and configuring devices using our Yang toolchain, but it was really only demo worthy and or prototype quality. And the idea is to actually bring it to bring the Yang toolchain and a set of models into that's going to be really hardened. And then the dynamic configuration subsystem, including the configuration synchronizer, needs to be brought into some shape where we can start using it as well. And ISSU is basically a feature that is on par with this, that we need to make significant headway in order to demonstrate that we can upgrade the cluster in place while without losing control over the network. So those are kind of the primary two features that are going to be the top of the priority list. But of course, they're by no means the sole entities on the list, right? Which is why you see the items that Yen is going over. So I'll be more than happy to discuss with you offline what drives the reasoning for this.
Yeah, it's just this is all coming out of nowhere, right? So I was
no, it's not. Why would it be coming from nowhere? Look at the Kingfisher, and if you look at Junko, if you were to rewind at Junko, I mean, this is all following a fairly steady trend.
Right. I just want to say that, I mean, this is the first time I've seen any of this stuff. And I've been attending the other meetings as well. So.
Yeah, no, definitely the dynamic configuration has been, focus, right? Now we've reframed it a little bit to be more in line with the kind of mission of ONOS rather than trying to mimic ODL. But yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's an improvement at least, I guess.
Okay, so we'll continue. And part of this is also focused around, there's platform hardening, but there's some deployment enablement as part of the focus, right? So ISSU, dynamic config, and being able to use Yang, some of that was focused on some of the deployment enablement that Asim has come back with. Okay, and then, so dynamic configuration is focused on what we've noted: charting of subtrees, performance improvements, configuration synchronizer. ISSU is the next highest priority, even though it's an incubation feature. It's really focused around exploratory workaround and service software upgrades. So looking at cryo-serialization, seeing how portable it is, right? Because ultimately we want to be able to take each member of a cluster down, be able to upgrade it, but that just means that there will be different versions running on different members of the cluster. And to have an upgrade coordinator that would facilitate the upgrade process. Code basis aggregation. This is critical to make sure that applications can be independent from the ONOS platform, so that it reduces the dependency on the core team in order to review that, but also allows the various applications to release in their own time frame also as needed. So for example, some of the Fabric stuff and some of the Cord applications are essentially going that way, with Cord being a more extreme version where they've migrated over to the Cord repo. And then we've got gRPC, which allows us to build a gRPC northbound, focusing initially on getting the core services set up so that they'll have a gRPC northbound intent. So the focus here is bandwidth reservation and enforcement to enable some of the services like VPLS, virtualization. There's some work in Kingfisher that has been pushed out to Loon, external connectivity and OF agent with the addition of OpenStack integration. GUI, source framework enhancements. This is really focused on making sure that unit testing, code coverage, all of those are in place with some API work to enable some of the overlay on the new topology. And then for QA, focus on debugging network partition tests, refactor, packet optical tests, resource manager tests, and the in-service software upgrade tests. There is a brigade starting up focused on enabling P4. The focus is on supporting a P4 runtime, which is a more standardized control protocol, and then GNMI to support open configuration of devices. And then in M, there's a focus on, with dynamic configuration, transactions and additional optimizations, in-service software upgrade, hopefully a released version of that with cryo, or there are thoughts around protocol buffer. P4, so supporting P4 runtime, open config, and then with gRPC adding to that functionality, as well as adding additional functionality to virtualization like snapshotting and embedding to support backup restore, and then GUI providing Topo2 overlay support, and then additional QA functionality. Any questions, comments on that?
Sure. Yeah. What's the overall kind of goal what's the consensus on the sort of what the goal is for the Loon release? I mean, what's it really trying to do overall?
I think there's a couple of things. I think in general we've got brigades that we're proceeding with. So some of that is with the brigades, we're essentially looking at incremental releases, right? So for virtualization, you'll see kind of that incremental. With some of the other functionality, such as dynamic configuration, ISSU, we're seeing those as being needed in order for us to make progress on deployments. And so as the team has been talking to partners, these are some functionality that they feel is critical in order to move further, to move past kind of the POCs and the trials, right? So some of these functionality is to support that. With GUI,
So it sounds like Intense and ISSU are for deployment, but I'm not sure about this other stuff.
Dynamic configuration for sure. And then with code basis aggregation, some of the concerns has been doing reviews and having applications or other functionality as part of the core has been taking a lot of time from the core team in order to review. And so part of the code basis aggregation work is to start pulling things apart so that applications can be delivered independently. We can start disaggregating things and start moving towards some of the process disaggregation, even that has been discussed, right? And so part of this is just start trying to see how we can better pull apart the code base so that we can look at being able to make the various applications or modules more independent. And then with gRPC, being able to provide a northbound that would allow applications to be off-platform essentially, and to have a way to access the platform, right? That isn't so tightly coupled, but in a faster, supporting something faster than REST, for example, right? So it's heading us towards a more deployable system, more independent and more deployable system.
I think some more thought needs to be put into that. Actually, like I don't really see the justification for this stuff being pulled out. It's certainly not on the slide, and it just doesn't seem to cohere into sort of a logical goal that we're trying to move towards. And I think it would be really helpful if it did.
I think they're all incremental, right? I mean, we're looking at each release as essentially 3 month windows, and so what you're seeing with each of the deliverables is they're incremental and heading us towards that I guess, deployment goal. But ultimately, each release is fairly incremental because of the folks that we have working on them. And so if you take...
What I'm seeing is that it seems that in many cases we're just continuing work on things because we were working on it in the last release, rather than because it's something it sort of moves us closer to a long-term goal that's very clear. I mean, maybe it does. It's just not clear how.
If this is a platform hardening release, then that makes sense, working on what you were working on in the last release, improving it.
Well, yeah, I guess so. I mean, platform hardening, I would say, would not be any of these new features. It would mainly be sort of like fixing, sort of fixing reliability issues, mainly. And I don't see a lot of bug fixing. I see mainly like sort of new features like P4 and GNMI and virtualization and GUI improvements, gRPC. Like I don't see it as a hardening release at all. So it seems that the stated goal is in opposition to your plan.
I think it's a little of everything. So we picked a theme, and the theme doesn't necessarily cover everything, right? The theme, for example, covers dynamic configuration. But for a lot of these other things, some of it is furthering the features. Some of it is, if you look at the GUI, for example, a lot of that focus is trying to create a solid base for the GUI, so that from a reliability standpoint, right, there's a lot of cleanup, making sure unit testing is there, making sure that the framework is available to allow brigade members to enhance the GUI as they needed, as needed for the demos that the partners want to do.
Okay,
so we
sounds like you just mentioned something new, which was like demos that partners want to do, which is a big unknown.
Well, for example, with the GUI, right, we actually have a new brigade lead who is interested in furthering the GUI in order to build a more kind of solid platform for, maybe his company's uses, right? But if we can go through each of these, and then maybe we can address more of the questions as we go through each of these items. Does that work? I'll take silence as a yes, and we'll move on. So Loon schedule. We're looking at 4 sprints in Loon. The sprint 1 actually starts next Monday. Technically, the Kingfisher release doesn't end until end of day tomorrow. So that'll give us a couple of days breather to think about Loon, with sprint 1 starting on Monday. It'll be a 3-week sprint, followed by a 4-week sprint after that. And then we'll have feature freeze after the end of sprint 3, with the release targeted for August 31st. There's a couple of brigades that are starting up. P4 for sure has been actively started with a bunch of brigade members. I think there's a meeting starting up tonight for the brigade members to get ramped up on plans around P4. ISSU currently is more of an investigation kind of experimental effort, so we'll have to look at what help is needed there by the community, and then gauge what we need to do there. There's also some integration efforts that Bill wants the team to focus on, right? So you've seen some of that in terms of Argella. So we'll monitor those as they come in to see what the impact is in terms of those contributions as we look at integration. And then we'll start with the rest of the brigades.
Go back to P4. So one of my big concerns about P4, it sort of crystallized in my brain when I was at the P4 kind of workshop, 2 days, pre-start workshops at Stanford. And it kind of occurred to me that the P4 consortium in general is kind of a vehicle for the success of Barefoot. And I want Barefoot to be successful, but I don't think that Barefoot's success should necessarily be ONOS's top priority. And if you look at in the hardware space in P4, there's only one player, and it's Barefoot Networks. And so I would say until there's other competitors of Barefoot and more P4 hardware, I kind of don't think we should waste time on P4 as a high priority for ONOS. It doesn't really make sense. It's not ONOS's job to further Barefoot networks. And P4.org really, if you look at P4, there's there's also Metronome is there, but they're kind of an also ran it. I just don't see it as a kind of a winning strategy. It's good for Barefoot, but it's really not clear that ONOS wants to go there. So I would kind of think we might want to back off on P4 as a priority because the hardware is just not there.
I think there's a couple of things driving this. So I was at the ONF boot camp, and we actually had a P4 Brigade table set up. Chatted with a couple of the silicon vendors and even some of the other partners, and there was a lot of interest in doing things around in-band telemetry, right? In terms of the work that how this would integrate with ACORD, with P4, the focus around just the programmability of ASICs. So there is interest there in terms of being able to leverage the functionality here, right? The other aspect of this is we're essentially an SDN platform, and so for us, it's a nice driver to be able to focus on being able to define the pipeline and being able to control the network, right? Versus focusing a lot of config. I know that you weren't thrilled about dynamic configuration, but P4 is really an avenue for us to look at more of the dynamic control aspects of the network, right? Which is,
I sort of believe that in the fullness of time, network operating systems should deal with data plane programming, but it kind of seems to be a little premature because there's, like I said, there's only one hardware vendor. And imagine if it were, Cisco, we're just, suppose that P4 is owned by Cisco and only works on Cisco hardware. It's kind of the same thing, right? We wouldn't want to work on a Cisco specific thing. And I think with P4, it's kind of a Barefoot specific thing. So I think we should really think carefully about whether that makes sense. And regarding inborn network telemetry, I'm not convinced. I think INT, it should probably be adopted by the IETF as part of TCP and ICMP. But even so, it has some issues, that nobody seems to want to mention, is INT information reliable? What happens when it overflows? Can it be forged? I ask INT people about this, and they never have good answers for that. And what about expanding the MTU? There are all these kind of fundamental technical problems with INT that sort of make it problematic. And if it's a good enough idea, it should probably be a standard anyway. So I don't think INT in itself is just a good enough justification for P4. And also just the fact that there's only a single hardware vendor, basically, is Barefoot. So I don't know. It seems like the wrong path to go on. And I'm surprised that nobody else seems to realize that.
I think we're starting to see more vendors, ASIC vendors, interested in this. And then,
so which ones have promised P4 compatible hardware so far? Broadcom, Intel, who else? Have they, has anybody else committed to, P4 capable hardware other than Barefoot? Is anybody else shipping it inside other than Barefoot? These are really serious questions that we need to ask before we, waste time on this.
Yeah, good comments. And I'm sure like I said, we're starting up the brigade this evening. And there is a good amount of interest. So I'm sure from that meeting we'll gauge where folks want to make use of this, right? A lot of what ONOS is focused on kind of the community interest also. So we'll let the brigade speak for itself. And then from today's meeting, we'll see where the interest lies, right? Because as you've noticed, the brigades to some extent deliver based upon kind of the community participation interest. So good questions and thoughts, and I think we'll gauge that based upon our discussions with the brigade members and volunteers this evening. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and move on to deployment. Yi, I think you were going to cover this.
Okay, so the deployment brigade, our goal is to create a shared, essential, and reliable software stack on top of ONOS, and make it easy to deploy and to maintain. And our accomplishment in Kingfisher is to improve the intent framework, but I will mention in the Northbound Brigade later. And also we do some bug fix and improvement of the southbound system. For example, the OptiPath pipeline and the flow objective system. Also, we do the VPRs refactoring, which allows other application can interact with VPRs more easily with some APIs we provide. And also, we can deploy the VPRs with intent framework with the OptiPath pipeline switch, which provides basic L2 unicase connectivity for hosts. And we have some deployments. First is the GENT Network Operation Center. They are testing deploy the ONOS with SDX L2R3 plus VPRs and the SDIP on Corsa switch with Corsa pipeline. And also we deploy ONOS in JGN X. And last is we deploy the VPRs, new VPRs application in NCTU, which provides the isolation for different Wi-Fi networks. Okay, and next. And so feature release, we are trying to support concast deployment and provide bandwidth allocation and enforcement in VPR certification, and do some integration between the VPRs and the bandwidth on demand (BOD), and some set of tests with GENT moved to production. Yeah, and we haven't discussed the N, yeah, the N variables. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you. So let's move on to network virtualization. Yoonseon.
Hi. The goal of our brigade is to enable the creation and management of SDN-capable virtual network on top of ONOS platform. So in this release, our accomplishment is flow objective service and message service for each virtual network to manage and to access each virtual network dedicated in service interface. And also we implemented distributed stores to enable to load balancing or partitioning of a virtual network among the multiple ONOS instance. And we also, as you mentioned earlier, so the original planning of this release, we have to provide two more features. The first one is the external connectivity, and the second one is open flow agent. But we didn't accomplish, we didn't deliver that two features in this release. But they will be accomplished in next releases. As a part of this effort, we implemented web agent REST API interface, REST API, to manage a web agent, and also we did the refactoring legacy code. Next slide, please. Okay, for the next release, Loon, we will, definitely will complete the features, open flow agent and external connectivity. In briefly speaking, web agent is a specialized application to allow the tenant to manage their virtual network through their own external controllers, whatever, open daylight or floodlight, whatever, through the open flow protocol. And the second, external connectivity is also we didn't decide the detailed design, but it will be designed as an application to give some capabilities to translation or some kind of bridges between the two networks. First one is the virtual network, other one is the external network, whatever internet or other virtual network. And the third one is OpenStack integration. It means that we also targeting to support our virtual network service system to provide OpenStack virtual network infrastructure. And as a next for the M release, we also have some plan that is we support the virtual network snapshotting to allow virtual network suspend and pausing and restoration and migration things as you did on computing resource virtualization did. And also we will support additional southbound implementation for virtual network. It means that we our service system is capable with the various southbound devices, such as the people or netcom. Yeah, and also we support the resilience things when the physical network or one of the ONOS interface, then we will provide some backup schedule or restoration schedule for the somewhat bad things happen. Okay, so and also one announcement for our brigade is there. So we recruiting new members for season 2. So we plan to recruit our brigade for around August. So if someone interested in virtualization, please recommend them to that as our new member. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Yoonseon. Thomas?
Sure. So as far as the Kingfisher deliverables in a dynamic configuration brigade, primarily it's the Yang Tools 2.0, which give us the ability to compile artifacts which are completely independent of ONOS, and which can then be used either directly by the drivers or as part of the prototype dynamic configuration subsystem. There was also OpenRODEM is compiled, and clearly, as was demonstrated at ONS, number of other subsystems that were required for the demonstration were delivered in their prototype form, specifically the dynamic distributed store, as well as the RESTconf and NetConf southbound adapters. So for the next slide, please. So for the Loon, the proposed Loon deliverables are to continue to work on the Yang tools and runtime to complete the live compiler capability, which will give us ability to compile Yang models based on conversation with the device for those devices that support that capability. And also to make sure that we can pre-compile all of the open config models and any IETF models that that are required by the open config. And these would then be available as ready-to-go extensions in ONOS. So all that one needs to do is just to simply activate them. As far as the rest of the dynamic configuration subsystem, the idea here is to harden some of the functionality that was demonstrated at ONS. Specifically is to provide better performance for the store by sharding and providing more locality associated with device mastership, and then also to consolidate the events that are emanating from the distributed subsystem to make the system easier to use. As part of allowing the as part of really supporting the device configuration, we need to be able to have the device config synchronizer capability introduced in order to be able to reconcile what the device currently has applied on it versus what it should have applied. And associated with that will be to productize the southbound NetConf and RESTconf adapters. It's a little bit hazier into the end release, but we foresee that most likely support for transactional updates will be introduced in the end release. And that's it at a high level.
So Thomas, I would a question. I mean, certainly NetConf is only one of the configuration southbound protocols. We also have OVSDB and you can imagine, and you can imagine SNMP, and we may implement GNMI as well. So will the device config synchronizer work with those other southbound configuration protocols as well?
That's a good question. So right now, we envision it to work with the dynamic config store, and it's supposed to be protocol independent. So clearly, at the very minimum, it should be working with the RESTconf and NetConf. So the question is then the answer to your question really will then depend on whether the other southbound protocols can operate using the basically using the structure of the data which is prescribed using Yang. If it can, then certainly we can do that. Now, when it comes to GNMI, note that the GNMI currently, as associated with the P4 demo, we're going to be using different tooling. We're not going to be using the ONOS Yang tools. Instead, we're going to be using the existing Google tool chain to effectively transform the Yang models into Google protocol buffers. And we're doing this for a couple of reasons: to reduce the scope, and also to kind of decouple the progress of the GNMI P4 demo from progress of the dynamic configuration brigade. But that definitely still leaves this issue pending of, well, so let's say that we've demonstrated it and it's something that's viable and desired. What will be the primary means of processing the Yang models into GNMI? Because currently it would seem redundant if we had to develop that functionality ourselves, especially if the Google toolchain can do that for us. So there will be a little bit of a, I guess, splintering happening in that area.
Yeah, another thing to think about is whether your configuration store is tied too closely to Yang, or could it also be used to store configurations that are implemented for other sort of configuration schemas, be it OVSDB or GUI or whatever they may be.
Sure, that's a good question. Now, technically, it should be possible as long as the data can be transformed and expressed in this tree structure. But clearly the proof lies in the pudding, and so we haven't attempted to do that, nor it is as part of the scope to attempt to do this, at least as part of the Loon release.
Yeah, I mean, for example, OVSDB is interesting because it uses tables, and it's not clear that those tables can be expressed in a tree model.
Exactly, which is why I'm a little bit reluctant to sort of promise that.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thanks, Thomas. We'll move on to GUI Brigade. So Stephen presented this morning. So Stephen is the new brigade lead for the GUI Brigade, but he is not able to make this session. So the focus, for Kingfisher, one of the main deliverables was Topology 2. It was released as an experimental feature for folks to be able to look at the topology, look at it in terms of regions, be able to delve down into each of the regions. And then there is also additions to enable aggregation of data over these synthetic links. And so from a region to region perspective, right, if you have a link between two switches that are in different regions, it's able to represent that as a synthetic link and be able to aggregate information there. There is also reinstating of the dark theme. And then for the upcoming, was there a question there?
No, I was just cheering on the dark theme. I love the dark theme.
Yes, it's back. And then for L, there is a focus on unit testing, code coverage, code style consistency. So making sure that the base of the GUI platform is pretty well hardened. There's also minification. So there's a bunch of JavaScript and CSS files that are pulled into the next file. So they're looking at trying to collapse that and just make it a bit more efficient. Another aspect of this is to build an overlay API to be able to allow folks to define overlays for topology 2 with the intent in M to provide the rest of the overlay support on topology 2. And then we'll go to gRPC. Aaron?
Yeah, so in this release, we have a lot of pending work, but it was blocked for a significant portion of the release cycle. So we have a lot of pending work, and it should be unblocked in the next day or so. So that's we don't have anything going into the Kingfisher release, but can we jump to the next slide? There's not much to talk about in the current release. Thank you. So for L, so first of all, we're going to have our Brigade work week. It's coming up in about 3 weeks. We're hoping to have most core services covered. We actually do have versions of 6 of them already sort of present and in what appears to be working order pending testing. We hope to provide a demonstration application in an alternate language, most likely Python. And once again, exploration of automated generation to keep these models up to date. And yeah, for M, client libraries would be the next logical step, and beyond that, I think that those are most of the goals for the gRPC Brigade. And we don't need any outside help at the moment. We're doing all right.
Is there going to be, I want to know, things like kind of testing and documentation and stuff like that?
Testing, yes. Documentation is a little challenging. So we can document the server-side code, but we can document our implementations and extensions, but since like the client stubs will be automatically generated, I'm not sure how to include documentation with them. Since any documentation we added would be blown away every time we regenerate. So that one is actually an ongoing challenge. I mean, there can be outside documentation, like wiki documentation, but that inevitably kind of falls out of date.
Well, I mean, it does if you don't maintain it.
Well, right. Yeah. Basically, unless we have a full position for it or find a way to sort of, most typically wiki documentation kind of goes in bursts. And I'm not sure if that's an ideal setup for this.
Would you like to create documentation that's synchronized with the source tree, or do you have a plan for doing that? Like, kind of tutorial style for, I'm thinking, for example, in order to use gRPC, as a developer, I need to know, kind of how to get started and what my workflow is going to look like. And I think, it's not reasonable to expect people to be able to figure that out magically or just by reading the code. So there needs to be some sort of documentation for that. And where do you think that documentation should go, and how should it be created?
Actually, so the best idea I have for that at present would be exploring how to basically documenting both our server-side implementations and extensions. And so that's, as far as I thought, that was where most of the documentation would reside. It would explain how to interact with these, but that would still leave some ambiguity for people using the client-side code, and I'm not sure how to. Yeah, because we're not generating the client.
Well, I just sort of have a suggestion
maybe a tutorial for generating.
Yeah, that some.
That would be a wiki.
Some help for that. I guess I want to suggest that if you want to make it, if you want people to actually use this, I think they'll need some kind of on-ramp to it. And, providing at least one would be very useful. Like, oh, if you want to write Python apps against this, here's how to do it. Here's what you need to do. Maybe you don't need to do anything. Maybe it's just like, import something and run it, or maybe you just install something. But basically explaining what people do, and also maybe explain like, oh, if you want to write off-platform, I mean, I don't know. Presumably you'll create some demo apps in different languages like, Python or Java or C++. And it'd really be nice to have some explanation on how to actually get that to work. At the very least, how to compile and run the demo applications would be, and against ONOS would be really useful.
I strongly agree. A tutorial application, sort of how to build one maybe in 1 or 2 languages. Java would be the obvious first choice because that's how most of the people developing for ONOS are already coding. So I think Python, because it's a good sort of prototype language, those would be the 2 most obvious to write a tutorial, like here's how you build a simple app.
Yeah. I mean, I like the idea of demo apps. They can serve a lot of useful purposes. 1, they're sort of a test of the system. 2, they might do something useful. And 3, perhaps most importantly, 3 is that they're sort of pedagogic. People read the code and learn how to use it by reading it. Right. And then 4 is they can also serve as starter code. People can take your demo app and maybe the demo app doesn't do a whole lot to start out with, or doesn't do quite exactly what they want, but they don't have to recreate the thing from whole cloth. They can take the existing app and use it as starter code for their specific application. So having high quality demo apps that are sort of documented and explained is a really good idea. And perhaps the explanation of the demo code should be checked into the repo so that it's synchronized with the demo code and doesn't go out of date with it. On the other hand, there's this idea of the sort of on-ramping of like documenting the workflow of how to actually compile it and run it, which I hope can be documented. So anyway, that's my pitch to you for documentation that I would love to see, that I think would really help make this brigade successful.
All right, I think those are all very good ideas for this. Thank you. Any other comments? No? I think it's time to jump to the next one then.
Thanks, Aaron. Build and package infrastructure brigade. Brian?
Yeah. So goal of the brigade, make sure we can build ONOS efficiently and consistently and create a set of artifacts that are easy to consume and deploy. So for Kingfisher, this brigade really just is getting started. There are a few things that have been done though. One was support for embedded dependencies, meaning you can put a jar inside of another jar which then gets loaded. This is a feature that Sona and a few other applications have depended on, and so they've been stuck on Maven. Another one is sort of beginning to experiment with code disaggregation using the repo tool. And there's going to be more work on that for the next few releases. The next is using Jenkins pipelines to do validations of Garrett patch sets. And finally, there's been some initial investigation into Gitbook and some other documentation tools that's going away. So for this release, the plan is to continue the obsolescence of Maven by driving towards 100% coverage with the buck build, to propose a concrete plan for code disaggregation. Some of that plan was discussed at the TST last week. And also to sort of standardize and start to check in some of the Jenkins jobs that we have, so that there can be some reuse of components for various different types of builds, rather than having a bunch of different builds that are managed via a GUI and not versions. Going forward into the M release, the brigade will be looking at actually using semantic versioning on our APIs and hardening, repo hardening. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but that probably means I'm not going to hypothesize. And finally, to start putting together a template and possibly instructions for how to build distribution-specific packages of ONOS, or recipes for various orchestration platforms like Chef or Puppet. So I don't know if this brigade will be maintaining distributions for all possible places, but at least having documentation and a repository where community members who want to participate or contribute to those would be able to do that. There is still opportunities to help with this brigade. So reach out to the brigade mailing list and/or Viswa if you'd be interested in contributing there.
Was that the right spelling of the email list? Last page.
Can you go back a slide? Yeah.
Oh, it doesn't matter.
What?
Can you go back one slide? Build infra. No, it doesn't look right. I think it's brigade infra. It actually might even be brigade infrastructure. I'll copy them.
Okay, we'll just check it on the. You can check for the. It's documented on the wiki, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's this whole thing.
Great.
Oh, that's big.
Awesome. I love it. I liked it when it was bigger. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
One other thing I'll just mention in the planning meeting, just because this will impact sort of everyone, is that the initial plan for the repo tool is to start pulling some of the sample applications out of ONOS Lab samples and showing how they can be pulled into a workspace with the ONOS overall code base. And then also taking a few select applications that want to be unhooked from the main build, like the Sona application, and try to build workspaces using repo. If that goes well, then there'll be sort of follow-up discussion about how we can methodically move through various applications and pull them into various code bases. But the goal was to basically have an opt-in system at first where a smaller number of people could be guinea pigs and we could gain more experience with the workflow before going all in on this particular tooling and setup.
I'm fine. Interested in trying it out. Actually, are ONOS Lab samples still built with Maven, or have they moved over to Beck? Or is there a plan for that?
Maven.
Is there a plan for moving them to Beck? Or is that going to happen as part of the repo work?
I think that would be involved more. Sorry, I think that would be done as part of the repo work. Porting them to build a buck inside of a buck workspace that coincides with the repo.
Just this embedded dependency is the BND tools feature.
Yeah, it's the same one. It's the same. It's the same. It's specified in the OSGI spec, and BND tools can do it without a problem. It just was we didn't have an option that was provided in our plugin to do it, and so that was added fairly recently, and I think it's available in the latest Buckon master.
Do you think it supports the inline instruction and so on?
Yeah, so actually anything you can do in Maven is actually supported in the underlying bind tools. And so any of those instructions we want to surface can be done fairly easily. And if you look at Viswa's patch set on this one, it's got a pretty good template of all the places that you need to add it. But any of the instructions, I think BND supports a superset of the Maven instructions. So any of them that are required should be doable. And like, not too much work. We can also consider like generalizing the mechanism where just arbitrary parameters are matched against
dictionary and go in.
But for now, they're enumerated.
Okay, any other questions? Now we'll move on to the teaching brigade. So Abdulhalim can't join us. So recently there was the brigade working days in Paris, and so they've noted that all the recordings are available, and they're starting to organize stories in Jira. And just to provide some context, the teaching brigade is currently focused on building out the content for a beginner's track. So as you look at the modules, they're focused on providing kind of intros to SDN, intros to ONOS, and so that's where the references to modules are. And so in Kingfisher, it's documenting and organizing the content for some of that. And then as we look at the L release, it's completing some of that work with a focus on, in the M release, being able to provide a training event during ONOS build. And then Northbound Brigade. Yi?
Okay, so our goal is improve the existing intent framework, and our accomplishment in Kingfisher is do the intent installer refactoring, and it allows applications use its own intent installer or change the intent installer in runtime. And also the new intent compiler for flow objectives supports group with multiple buckets, and now we support intent domain, which interact the intent with domain service, and do some improvement to allow the intent framework integrate with OpenTP pipeline. And the proof of concept is the ONOS in a box, which put the ONOS inside the hardware switch. And next slide. And for L, we want to provide a bandwidth reservation and enforcement using the intent framework. So it allows the application using the intent framework to reserve the bandwidth. And we will refactor the resource service to improve the performance, and yeah, also the registered resource update. Yeah, and for the N, it depends on L. Yeah, we haven't discussed. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks, Yi. The next thing is the Security and Performance Analysis Brigade. They also recently did a work week in Paris. It was all kind of grouped together with the Learning Brigade. In terms of Kingfisher, this brigade has been looking at security issues and testing. They've actually identified a couple of security bugs that we've been working on for ONOS, with some of that, one of them actually being in the Kingfisher release. And then in terms of ongoing activities, they're working actively with our QA team, and then they're looking at ONF security to use the Delta tool for security tests, and looking at a report at the end of June. We are working with the Security and Performance Analysis Brigade to expand the charter, to add developers so that they can help us fix security and performance issues that are discovered over time as this team focuses on kind of that testing. And then P4. The P4 Brigade is starting up. There is, from a timing perspective, there wasn't time to get a work week in place, but the launch for the P4 Brigade is actually today. In terms of L deliverables, the initial plan is to focus on the southbound and add a support for P4 runtime. So P4 essentially creates a pipeline, and then P4 runtime is the control protocol that is being standardized to provide runtime control. And then there'll be some extension to Flow Rule API to provide more generic match in action, but the goal would be to keep the Northbound API fairly consistent for now. And then in terms of M deliverables, the plan would be to refactor some of the Northbound APIs to be more protocol independent, and then to provide runtime reprogramming of the P4 program that are on the devices. And then there are some areas that the community can help on, and these will be discussed with the brigade, is to be able to provide some generic parsing of packets and flow rule translation for some of the match criteria. And then Jordan?
Oops, okay. Yeah, so in terms of ISSU, so what we're focusing on for the L release is basically sort of putting in place the foundation for in-service software upgrades. So the idea is that you'll be able to upgrade a running ONOS cluster by taking nodes down individually and upgrading them. The big challenge with this is serialization across different versions. You know, if one node is running version 1, another node's running version 2, they have to be able to communicate with each other. And so the first deliverable on here is adapting cryo to be able to do serialization across nodes like that. And then there are some lower level issues than that even, which is versioning all the messaging protocols and the Raft, like the files that are stored on disk inside the Raft implementation, things like that. And then updating the messaging service to be able to handle the conversions based on the version that's running on a remote node, things like that. And then some service to actually coordinate the upgrades to understand the life cycle of upgrades and what versions are running on which nodes and when an upgrade's complete and stuff like that. And then, so that's for L. And then for M, it's really just dependent on what lessons we learned from the initial ISSU work. I'm hoping that that what we want to deliver in M will be a lot more clear. One of the things we discussed was protobuf, but we thought that it was too big of a change to be made right now. So we'll try to use cryo to do cross-version serialization, and then we'll consider using protobuf perhaps in M. And then in terms of community help, there's some potential to get some help with protobuf migration if we do that, or also maintaining the versioned cryo classes. That's it.
So I can imagine that like an in-service upgrade from like a cryo version to a protobuf version is going to be super challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, and that's why we didn't want to do it. There's a lot of lower level foundational work that needs to be done. We don't want to worry about trying to move to protobuf for everything that's stored inside of ONOS. It'd be kind of crazy.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, thanks, Jordan. Let's move on to QA. Sujitra?
Okay, for QA, as part of the Kingfisher deliverables, we had updated the performance white paper, and as part of this activity, we had refactored several tests. The way we were taking the measurements were, some of the tests were incorrect, so we had refactored them and updated the white paper accordingly. We are hoping to release the white paper after we have some couple of updates to the results from the Kingfisher RC build and the final RC build. And also we want to have some couple of reviews internally before we release the white paper outside. And we also had accomplished a Docker test to pull the images and then test the stability of ONOS and have a quick sanity test after we pull the Docker images. And we also have written some new tests around the bandwidth allocation feature. And apart from these, we had made several improvements for the existing test suites that we had. Like for some of the test suites we have listed here were the intent test, netcon, netcfg, bgpls. Basically, these testing improvements, each test suite has different improvements. Some of them were reporting, and some of them were the stability of the test itself, and some of them included like the way we were reporting the data, input data to the configurations, various configurations in this test. So these were the deliverables as part of Kingfisher. Next slide, please. So as part of L release, we plan to debug some network partitioning tests, and then we want to refactor some of these network partitioning tests as well. And if applicable, we want to also write some new tests regarding the ISSU feature. And well, the packet optical tests have been failing in the Kingfisher release. So we have a task now to refactor this packet optical test. There have been several changes that went into packet optical features, so many tests were failing, and we might need to refactor around that area. And also, we have identified some test-on feature, some of the test approaches, the way, like some of the tests we had different, the way we were bringing up configurations for several test suites are all different. So we want to realign and refactor these test cases in order to have a common configuration setup and also some startup procedures. So these we plan to have in the L as part of L. We might not be able to accomplish everything, but we might prioritize based on the importance of how we have the test setup. And we also plan to have and add some resource manager test cases too. And these are the L deliverables. And for the as part of the M deliverables, we plan to write some new readout intent test which uses the OpenFlow. And we want to also create some test cases around measuring the latencies for the topology change events, mostly from the southbound. And in terms of the community help, we would request to have more tests to be created as part of each brigade. So maybe more testers should be added to the brigades, and then have more test coverage both for unit and system test coverage. So this is a request. And also another community help that we were looking for is the security test. We had integrated Delta tests into ONOS like last release. And we are working with the Security and Performance Brigade to identify some of the security tests from Delta feature, from the Delta area, and so that the members from the Security and Security and Performance Brigade would take over this test and analyze it for us. So that's all. So any questions?
Sure. Like how much of the testing is with kind of software switches versus hardware switches for ONOS?
We do not have any tests for the hardware switches.
Are you thinking of adding some hardware, some testing on hardware into your testing plan?
We could, but we never really thought of that. If it is really required, and then we might add that. We never gave a thought on it.
I think it's something to think about. Obviously, we as ON.Lab can't do extensive hardware testing, but I think it'd be nice to have our tests running on at least one hardware test bed as well as a software test bed. Not that I don't love many, I do, but and OBS. But you often find out stuff in hardware testing that you wouldn't necessarily find in software testing, one way or the other.
Yeah.
It could be bugs in the switch, could be bugs in your infrastructure, could be bugs in the tests, could be bugs in ONOS, could be bugs in the emulator where something works in simulation but the error isn't shown up for various reasons. It could be synchronization or timing, right, or it could be a bug in the emulator. So it's always interesting to validate your software testing results or your emulation testing against hardware. At least one platform. Pick a good OpenFlow switch, whatever that may be. A good, hopefully cheap OpenFlow switch, or a good OpenFlow switch that we just happen to have, and just use it. I think that would be a valuable addition to the testing for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and we actually did have a bug in the distributed systems, I think, recently that only happened on hardware switches.
Oh, right.
Oh, interesting.
So yeah, I totally agree with that.
Okay, sure. We'll take that into account. Thanks.
Okay, thanks, Sujitra. I'll move on to packet optical. Yuta?
Okay, so packet optical has mainly been about dealing with technical debt, and we delivered was the open ROADM device support in the dynamic config, and we went, well, mainly Mark became the guinea pig for the dynamic config thing, and it seems to be somewhat working. And we also finished up the protection behavior support, and this is kicking off packet optical work, but we now have support for OpenFlow 1.4 devices.
Cool.
And next slide. So for the future work, so the main part of this brigade work will be around the entity, supporting the entity deployment stuff. So the priority projected here is likely to flop depending on how that prioritization on their side goes. So, but this is our best estimate as of right now. So we're thinking we will try to see if we can integrate the multi-layer intent tracking into the intent subsystem to see whether we can properly deal with lower layer intent, providing the connectivity show up in the higher level, upper layer intent. Another thing that we would like to look into is the subsystem to start tracking physical parameters like the power level and so on, which we now have a behavior, but we don't have subsystem for it, so that we can start building a channel power balancing application and so on. And next one is sort of similar to the one I mentioned. This is not strictly packet optical, but there's no place to place it. But this is about bumping the loxy chain. Bumping the loxy chain part is now merged to the 1.11 patch, but we are still missing feature that was introduced in OpenFlow 1.5, and Murat is intending to work on that to introduce some of the features introduced in OpenFlow 1.5 to ONOS. And that's about it.
So we talked about this a little bit, but apparently you have like a hardware test bed for packet optical, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Do you run like? Did you say that you were thinking of possibly running regular tests on that, or do you just use it for development, or?
Just for development, I would say.
Yeah.
It's not that we own the infrastructure, so we have. They might just come up in 1 week notice. We're going to take that hardware down, and we may lose it. So I'm not really sure whether we want to rely too much on that. Here is sort of the current situation.
Yeah. Do you think it's possible to do sort of regular hardware testing, or not?
Well, at least for optical side of things, unlikely, I would say.
At least I see. So you're saying you would need an additional dedicated resources, or you would need some like commitment from the people you have that they wouldn't take it away, or would you just run it until they take it away? I don't know. You could just do that too, right? I don't know. It seems that it might be. We were talking about this earlier, but it seems that this might be useful. Maybe, I don't know. To have some sort of regular, nightly or weekly test that you want to run. You can also just run them on your own, I guess, which is fine too. But it sometimes is useful to have regular tests that are sort of where that run automatically, so that you sort of catch stuff that you might catch stuff earlier on than because you just forgot to test it or didn't run the test this week or whatever.
A possible option could be to integrate it with some of the cord testing, right? Because there are multiple deployments of the cord pods.
Yeah. Also, obviously it can be done by organizations. They can, they could potentially run tests that, the data is fed back to the mothership and aggregated somehow. So it's, Sienna ran tests, Fujitsu ran tests, whoever else, I don't know, NTT ran tests, Cord ran tests. It'd be interesting. It might provide valuable information to like aggregate that in and sort of have a way to look at it along with the other ONOS tests to see, because they'll probably come up with stuff too. Yeah, maybe Cord will maybe that stuff will be exercised adequately by the Cord tests. I don't know. On the other hand, it seems like the Cord tests are like way more complicated and require XOS and all this other crap. Whereas in just testing ONOS with some optical switches and a simple test bed topology might be faster, easier, and require less hardware. Maybe. Maybe, I don't know. Depends, I guess.
Okay, thanks, Yuta. So I'll move on to kind of the last few items. Yoonseon couldn't join us. So from a Kingfisher standpoint, they've added VLAN-based virtual networking as an alternative to VXLAN, added support for security groups, added methods to recover the data plane. They're also adding support for OVS connection tracking and NAT extensions to ONOS LockC. They're adding unit testing, and as part of upcoming releases, they're going to be focused on adding more unit testing. And then they have a version of Sona installed and activated on ONOS Docker images in Docker Hub. In terms of L deliverables, the plan is to improve security group with OVS connection tracking, improve virtual router gateways with OVS NAT extension, move Sona pipeline from driver to application level, add REST interface for OpenStack node service, add Sona-specific virtual networking models, and support Sona driver to OpenStack Helm and Cola Kubernetes, as well as adding more unit tests with M focused more on providing load balancing as a service, firewall as a service, VPN as a service, and then additional monitoring and operation support tools. Lisp. Jin also,
I had a question for Yoon actually, which is there any reason why? I mean, it seems like I'm a little bit skeptical of supporting OVS NAT directly, because it seems like the virtualization part of ONOS is going to need a NAT and gateway functionality anyway. So why not use like the NAT and gateway functionality from the virtualization part of ONOS in the OpenStack integration? Or is that the plan? I'm not sure. It seems that there are two ways of doing it, right? Either you can delegate it to OVS, or you can have it as an ONOS app. And the ONOS app approach, I think, is a winning approach because it doesn't depend on OVS, it works on hardware, right? And also it sort of, would be one way of doing it that we could sort of focus on, that would be documented and more reliable, and it would also be less work than supporting two different mechanisms. What do you think about like kind of ONOS NAT versus OVS NAT?
Actually, we didn't think about that, but I think ONOS NAT is a very approachable or friendly approach for ONOS communities, but we cannot ignore some opinions from the OVS NAT or the other parts.
I mean, you could have both too. I mean, if maybe some people, but it seems that if you had ONOS NAT, you wouldn't need OVS NAT in some sense. So why not just do ONOS NAT? And ONOS NAT is like useful on its own as a separate application, even independent of virtualization, right?
Yeah.
So that's something to think about.
Okay, thank you for correcting.
and then Lisp. I see Jian on the call, so.
I will cover, I'm Yoonseon, I will cover instead of Jian this part. He's on the back, on the way to Korea from Paris.
That's got to be a long trip.
Yeah. Okay, so in this release, Kingfisher release, first of all, the Lisp server system is the core of the Lisp server system is supporting control plane functionalities. So it locate, identify, separation protocol as a ONOS sound-bound interface. So in this release, we focused on the mapping management application to allow programmability on this mapping system. So to do that, we developed some kind of stores and also managers and also some interfaces to access the mapping system and stores. And also we did improve some SBI performance by introducing our hashing mechanisms to reduce the query delay. And also we improved the map server and resolver performance, also. Please go to next slide. For the early releases, we are more focused on to connecting our the list mapping system to connect other mapping system. It means that the list is Cisco provides some their data network to connecting the list side to through their own manageability control plane system. So to interact with them, we need a DDT or some kind of distributed, some kind of, it's a similar logic with DNS. So it's a kind of protocol to communicate with between two or more list mapping systems. So we need that. We will implement that DDT, delegate database tree, and also we will focus on more on documentation by providing tutorials how to use list subsystem, and also we are focused on to improve more list query performance system. Also, we will improve the security issues, and finally also to complete our list site manageability, we need hardware configurability. So we found that the OOR, one of the open overlay router, is one of the open source projects. So they also provide the LEST based and the netconf based configuration. So we will support netconf driver for compute to allow configuration through as ONOS configuration system. Okay, and also propose them delivers we consider we planning to support master shifts list routers to allow distribution, and more we also investigate on to find more use cases how we show the developed list system is bring some advantages or benefits to the community. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yoonseon. No updates for ACTN and no updates for secure mode ONOS. So we'll move on to L1 sprint planning. Sprint 1 will start on Monday. It'll be at 3 p.m. I'll be closing the sprint 4 sprints in Jira by the end of the day tomorrow, and then create new sprints so that folks can add stories for the sprint planning on Monday. And then preview of the demos that we had this morning, but Stephen wasn't able to make it this afternoon. So if you're interested in the demos, I'll be posting the videos and you can take a look at the demos from this morning. That's all we've got for this release planning. Any questions before we close this out? Okay, thanks everyone.
Good, thanks.
Bye.